So, Dubai chocolate has been everywhere, and with Easter coming up and Easter egg prices at an all-time high, I thought, why not try to make my own Dubai chocolate Easter egg? To make this egg, I went to Hobbycraft for these egg moulds, and I'll try to keep a running total of costs throughout the whole video to see if I manage to come in under budget. I also hit up a few shops for this haul. I'm planning on making a few different eggs, so I won't be using all of these ingredients in this video. I had to go to a few different shops because the only place that seems to sell pistachio paste is M&S, and I didn't want to blow the budget by buying everything there. I'm sure many of you can relate, but I always forget something, so I also had to go shopping again for the tahini. Once I finally had everything else together, it was time to get started. I couldn't find the right type of pastry in UK shops, so I decided to try and make the pastry myself. I'll link any recipes I used below, and making the pastry would also help reduce the cost and stay in the budget. The pastry recipe just needs corn flour, oil, salt, plain flour and water. I sieve the flour and corn flour into a bowl and then stir in the salt, water and oil. I'll pass it all through the sieve again to remove any lumps, and what I end up with is a pretty thin, perfectly smooth batter. Then over to the frying pan. I had it on a medium heat and used a spoon to create thin lines, trying to make sure that the lines never crossed over. My first attempt didn't go great, but I think my technique improved over time. I've seen people use a piping bag to make sure the line is consistent, but I thought this would be easier and it would mean that I have less to clean up. When the batter started to come away from the pan and looked like it was cooked through but still quite pale, I scooped it out and put in the next batch. Once all the batter was cooked, I was left with this. It's definitely not perfect, but it was my first try, so I think it went pretty well. But for Dubai chocolate, this needs to be toasted. Usually this is done in the pan with butter. I was kind of bored of frying by that point, so I tested out using the air fryer. I checked it pretty regularly, but I still think some of them came out a little bit too crispy, but I think this will work fine for the crunchy part of the Dubai chocolate filling. Now I'll move on to the shell of the egg. For this one, I want half to resemble the famous Dubai chocolate bar, and the other half to look like a big green shelled pistachio. I melted a bar of white chocolate in the microwave in short bursts, and then portioned some out to dye green and some for orange. I added gel food colouring, which definitely won't make the chocolate seize, foreshadowing, and with a tiny bit of green got the initial pistachio colour that I wanted. I poured this into half the egg mould and spread it out to make sure that it was completely covered. I added a little more food colouring to the chocolate and it started to seize. I wondered if it was just cooled down a bit too much, but after trying to reheat it, it just would not go runny again. So I gave up on achieving that iconic splatter look and switched to sort of patches of colour for the second half of the shell. For some reason, I then added the rest of the white chocolate before later remembering that it should be milk or dark chocolate, and I ended up remaking this half of the egg so that it would look right. But I still had the same issue with the coloured chocolate seizing up. If you know how to avoid this, please let me know in the comments. I put these in the fridge to completely set and then moved on to making the pistachio filling. I had the pastry we made earlier, a whole jar of pistachio cream, a little bit of tahini and a big pinch of salt. Again, I'll link the full recipe below. I gave that a good mix and tried to break up the pastry into small chunks, which will make it easier to spread on the egg, before finally adding a thick layer of the mixture onto each half of the shell and then putting that in the fridge just so that it firms up a little bit. Meanwhile, I melted down some more dark milk chocolate mix. I'm using a bar of each just to make it a rich chocolate taste. The melted mix is then poured over the pistachio filling, making sure to seal it all the way along the edges. I'm trying to make all the chocolate as thin as possible, but it might end up a little thicker in places. Then these go back in the fridge to set. Once set, I consider ways to join the two halves. I've seen people melt both edges and bond them together, but I thought it would be easier to melt some leftover chocolate and then push the two halves together. I popped them back in the fridge to set and they turned out pretty well. I actually ended up with enough spare chocolate and filling to make a mini egg and use this as a test for the next bit. The joining technique was super simple, but it did mean that they had a fringe to trim. I thought a knife in hot water would cut through the excess and melt it to leave a clean finish, but this didn't really work out, so I just ended up using a sharp knife. There were a few small voids which you could go back and patch up with more chocolate, but I'm pretty happy with the end result. I weighed the egg, which came in at 599 grams, much heavier than the shop eggs. The closest egg I could find was this pistachio egg, which is 17 pounds for 320 grams, which I'll use to compare my costs. Taking into account that a lot of my egg's weight is the filling, whilst this Waitrose egg seems to be all chocolate. Overall, I had a great time making this, and it's definitely a fun Easter activity. Let me know in the comments below if you've made your own Easter eggs and which flavours you chose. Also let me know how I did for my first attempt, but try to be kind. Thanks for watching, please consider liking and subscribing, and stay tuned for the cracking reveal. Now, this is where I reveal my secret. I've never tried pistachio before, and I'm using this mini egg as a test. I'm so happy with how this turned out. I really think it resembles the Dubai chocolate bar, and the layers are almost perfect, and now just to taste it. Okay, I have to be honest, this is delicious, but I don't think pistachio is my favourite flavour, so I'm going to go ahead and enjoy this small egg and gift the larger one to someone that will appreciate it just a little bit more. Happy Easter!